Last week I came upon an article in the local paper about 74-year-old Robert Pearson, who for the last 14 years has offered travelers a shoe shine and conversation at the Waco airport. He calls it putting a glow on the toe, while also helping travelers with bags, providing sage counsel and spiritual guidance, and giving directions to Waco's attractions, according to the article. Robert says, you pay for the shine, but there's no charge for the conversation. But Mr. Pearson received a letter last month from the Waco Regional Airport Director informing him that the city was terminating his contract effective last Sunday. It seems Pearson's shoe shine stand fell victim to the city's quest to standardize its contracts with city vendors. The director said it is important for the airport to become a revenue-generating department. Mr. Pearson's revenue had to exceed a threshold, and for the past few years he hasn't made enough money. Consequently, he hasn't paid the city anything. So the director is quoted as saying, wait a minute, you have someone in a prime location and you have all the amenities, and in a sense he is not really paying anything. It's an emotional time for Mr. Pearson. He doesn't fully understand why, but he reluctantly accepted the city's decision. He told the Waco Trib, I want to thank all the wonderful, blessed people who have helped me and supported me over the years. God bless them. Thanks for all of them, and may God bless and keep them. They have shined their many blessings on me, and I love them and pray for them all. Life goes on, and there is a better place for me. God has a better plan for me, and I want to thank everyone for so many blessings, the memories, the joy, the peace, and the prayers. If this makes you angry, if you want to tell the director of operations at the airport that there are some things that are more important than the almighty dollar, then I think you have a sense of what Jesus was saying in this morning's parable. Or at least what I think Jesus was possibly saying. Because you see, commentators and preachers have been trying to figure out this parable for millennia, and I am not going to proclaim here that I've got it all figured out. It's a confusing parable, made even more confusing by the gospel writers' chronicling of the words of Jesus immediately following it. It's a story similar to that of Robert Pearson's, whose employment with the city ended because city management felt they weren't getting enough money from Pearson. Similar also because Mr. Pearson will be counting on the generosity and compassion of others as he walked away from his airport shoe shine business. In Jesus' parable, the boss man received word that his manager was cheating him out of some revenue. And he calls in the manager and gives him his notice. So the manager, knowing his days were numbered, and knowing also he would need a roof over his head, forgave a large portion of the debts that were owed to the boss man. And here's where it gets tricky, because in my own interpretation, I'm adding some stuff to the text that isn't really there. If the boss man is happy with the manager, as he seems to be at the end of the parable, I can only assume he got all the money he was anticipating. Had he received less, then he would have probably flown into a rage. And those who were indebted to him were no doubt also happy because they owed as much as 50% less than what they had expected. So someone has to be losing out. Who's losing out on the money that wasn't collected. The only one left is the manager. I propose that the manager apparently forgoes the extra money that he would have been pocketing, realizing that there are some things more important than money at the moment. And one of those things was a roof over his head. Instead of asking for the full invoice, a percentage of which would have gone into his pocket, I believe he only asks for the big boss's portion, in the hope that he will befriend someone who will offer him a place to stay when he's given the boot. And since I'm on a roll here, I might as well throw in what I think might have happened when he carried out his scheme. I'm thinking that probably for the first time in his career, he came to know some of the debtors as more than a source of income. When he told them they didn't owe as much as they were expecting, I'm betting for maybe the first time ever he saw them smile at him. They may have even invited him to sit with them and share a cup of wine, possibly showing him around their home and introducing him to the children. And essentially, that's the end of the parable. But unfortunately, not the end of our text. I say unfortunately because next you have Jesus saying all these things that don't seem to make any sense or have a whole lot of connection to the parable. He says the children of light need to act more shrewdly. He says we should make friends by dishonest wealth. He says if you're not faithful with dishonest wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And then he closes out the text telling us we can't serve two masters. And if you're scratching your head about all of this talk of dishonest wealth and the children of light taking lessons from crooks and wondering what in the world it has to do with the parable, then join the club. So am I. And so have most commentators ever since it was written. In fact, there are a whole lot of folks way smarter than me and you who think that part was added in by some editors along the way who were offering up their own interpretation of the parable. So I guess I'll stick to my own understanding of it. It's an interpretation in which Jesus is advocating for the forgiveness of debts that are owed to us. Something that must have been pretty important since he did include it in the model prayer he left for us. Forgive us our debts as we also forgive our debtors. And in that forgiveness, we come to learn that there are some things that are more important than money. And one of those things is our relationship with each other. Human relationships trump financial gain every time. But unfortunately, every day we are surrounded with cases in which money is valued over people. It happens when we ignore the effect that tariffs are having on farmers and small business owners. It happens when a person's immigration status is based on how much they can contribute to the economy. It happens when we refuse to help out someone on the street because we may not have enough money for our latte. It happens when our personal comfort takes precedence over the care of the earth and sky and water for future generations. It happens when we buy goods that are inexpensive while closing our eyes to the slave labor and human trafficking associated with the companies that produce these goods. I agree with Nancy Rockwell's takeaway from today's parable. Jesus reminds us that what is fair according to God is siding with those who owe and groan under the weight of their debt, not with those whose ledgers are pristine and who have never shown mercy to a debtor. But if God sides with those who owe and groan under the weight of their debt, so should we. There are things we can do if we are willing. For instance, we can educate ourselves about where our name brand or discount clothing may have come from. Then we can decide how important it is for us to make that purchase. And yes, it takes a bit of effort to do the research, but probably not as much as we might think. I've tried to make it a little easier for you with one of the inserts in this morning's worship bulletin. And yet, I know how difficult it often is to make ends meet without taking advantage of that discounted item. So there has to be a balance somewhere, and you have to be the one to decide where that balance is, not me and not anyone else. Money is important. It pays doctor's bills, it pays utilities and the mortgage, and it puts food on the table. It's important, but it's not the most important thing in the world. Human relationships are more valuable. The manager in this morning's text seems to have made that discovery. Robert Pearson seems to know it, even if the city doesn't. So let's take our lessons from them. By the way, as of 2 days ago, things have turned around for Mr. Pearson. It seems that former Waco Congressman Chet Edwards has known Pearson for years. And through his influence, in addition to the social media posts that blasted city officials for their treatment of Pearson, a GoFundMe page was set up for Pearson, and he will now be shining shoes and offering conversation to patrons at a free choice lobby location at the Extraco Bank at 1700 North Valley Mills Drive. Let's always stand on the side of those who owe and groan under the weight of their debt. And may we find a blessing in taking that stand. Amen.